Good evening to most, and good morning to those that will listen to this broadcast later. I am your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Before we get started, I want to thank all our returning listeners and subscribers, and a big, massive shout out to all the TiR patrons. You are the renewable fuel in the TiR engine that allows this show to carry on. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It's a passive gesture that goes very long way. The holidays are approaching, and what better way to tell someone you love them than with a TiR Patreon membership? That's right. You can now gift a Patreon membership to a loved one or to your racist family member that says the N-word with the hardest of ours. Either way you go, somebody wins. Everybody wins. And bam, QR code is on the screen. It should be right there. You should see it. Scan that, and you can gift a membership to this wonderful show to a loved one. Also, don't forget the TiR merch store is open, and you can confuse all the libs and Trump supporters in the family with an Anglo-pessimism shirt. Anglo-pessimism. It's not just for white people. Hey-o! Bam! So if you look down and scan right there, get your Anglo-pessimism shirt. Your dad's like, what is this? It's like, just wear it. Shut up. They don't need to know. And it's great. Again, everybody wins. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get on with the show. One of us is the killer. And we're also going to talk about Ben's most recent article in Damage Magazine, Why Trump Isn't a Fascist. Have you guys read that? I don't think I linked that because that came out after he had agreed to come on the show. But anyway, some weeks ago, we dropped the 4th issue of the Crisis Papers on TiR, a collection of essays addressing diverse topics available for free to all patrons. I'll stop. In this latest issue, we examine the futility of online outrage, particularly directed at what I've termed political opinionists. The inspiration for this paper came from a clip I posted of a rant on the phenomena of media, quote, heel turns, the overuse of the term grift, and the impotence of the online mob. The modern practice of standing a celebrity or media figure has always unsettled me. While the term has declined in popularity, I don't believe this signals a decrease in fandom. Rather, fandom has adapted, reflecting a broader trend of managed allegiance in our digital age. In the article, we explore how the relationship between fandom and celebrity, particularly in leftist digital spaces, often substitutes symbolic gestures for substantive political action. Alan Moore, author of Watchmen, recently critiqued this shift, describing fandom as a, quote, toxic force, transforming admiration into fundamentalism and vendettas. Moore warns that this echo chamber, driven by strict orthodoxy, fosters ideological purges that may mistake for genuine activism a digital gulag maintained by what could be called a cyber Stalinist regime. A quote here from the article. This strained relationship between fandom and celebrity, especially within left-leaning digital spaces, exemplifies the illusion of political participation in the absence of real structural change. As Alan Moore, the author of Watchmen, recently argued, fandom has toxified the world, unquote. In an interview with The Guardian, Moore explains how fandom now manifests as a mechanism for obsessive control, often spilling over into vendettas against the creators they once admired. Quote, we've reached a point where fandom has begun to resemble religious fundamentalism, unquote. Moore suggests where adherence to a narrow orthodoxy defines the worth of creators and personalities alike. This environment creates an echo chamber where any slight deviation from a perceived leftist consensus is seen as ideological treason worthy of condemnation and social media shaming, a ritual that many mistake for genuine political activism. The virtual gulag is the destination that the cyber Stalinist regime is campaigning for. That is a clip from the article. Wherever you're watching or listening to this show, there's a link in the description to all of the crisis papers. Beyond the article, which our guest helped edit, we'll discuss his most recent piece in Damage Magazine titled, "Is Trump Hitler or Just Woodrow Wilson?" In the article, our guest Ben Burgis lays out a coherent argument on why the fascist argument around Donald Trump obscures his actual goals with administration, and how the fascism framework in liberal circles is designed to engage true leftists away from the fight for redistribution of wealth, building a strong workers' movement, into the war against Trump, whatever that may be. Burgess writes, "First, hysteria serves no one. And it certainly doesn't serve a long-term project like patiently rebuilding the workers' movement and constituting the kind of left that could actually contest for power in as deeply anti-socialist a country as the United States. Second, the implicit logic of fascism analogies in intra-left discourse is nearly always to encourage leftists to put aside our battles with the neoliberal center over economic questions in favor of a procedural defense of democracy against what's postulated as an urgent common threat. This amounts to telling socialists to endorse pretty much the same, quote, build the broadest possible front around the most minimal possible basis of agreement strategy that Democrats and never Trump Republicans have been doggedly pursuing since Trump first came down the escalator in 2015. The abject failure of the Harris campaign to lean into an economically populist message is precisely what led to an unprecedented level of working class support for the fascist Trump." I don't necessarily agree 100% with that. I don't. You know why? Because I know he didn't watch all the ads. I know he didn't. I know he didn't watch every debate. And if he says he did, he's lying. I will go over there and tell him that his pants are on fire. Endlessly relitigating January 6th and constantly reminding voters of how sensible people across the political spectrum vote supporting Harris. Everyone, as she and her surrogates often said, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney, simply didn't move ordinary Americans. So join us today as we engage in what I think will be an interesting conversation. Please welcome my friend, editor, neighbor, apparently Kamala Harris hater, Ben Burgis.
Well, 2 points about that. One, I hate myself way more than you think I do because I actually did watch every debate.
Oh.
So
It only had one, so
yeah. Well, there was one each with Biden, Trump, Harris, Trump, and
we're talking about Harris here. We don't bring up Biden. Don't gish gallop.
And Vance Vance Waltz. Man, it took me
Oof.
a second to remember Tim Waltz. That tells you something. But yeah, I did watch all three of those. I think it is true that like some of the ads, like this is like a kind of standard point, like some of the ads did get more into economic stuff. But I'll tell you what, if you watched the debate, singular, and Harris's speeches, right? You know, like the every now and again when she came out of the basement and gave a speech, then like, look, the only real economic content there is like, what did she say? Like she was there would be every like, maybe in like a half hour speech, there would be like a sentence about how we're gonna like do something or other to make the ACA better on healthcare. Otherwise, it was like, oh, we're gonna like give some assistance to first-time homeowners, which is nice.
She actually talked a lot. She had a whole ad campaign about the high cost of groceries and inflation and price gouging. And I haven't seen anyone in the left space bring that up because it's always about like, well, she didn't say the thing that Bernie Sanders said, ergo she didn't say anything. And this isn't a defense of her. This is more of, it's not a defense. I mean, to keep saying that. It's more of an observation that there were things said whether or not people want to acknowledge the things that were said, you have to me, if you want to say, well, she ignored
Yeah.
these economic populist strategies in favor of talking about a tax cut. She did talk about that, but she also did talk about, and again, had an entire ad campaign centered around it, price gouging in groceries.
Although the best ad that they came up with on price gouging, they actually never ran, or almost never ran. Like that was the one that tested, right? They pretty much shelved, for the whole campaign. And it is really striking that, like, if you watch, like, yeah, again, I understand some of the ads, like, depending on which state you're talking about, some of the ads were better. That's true, right? But like, if you're talking about the main campaign message,
I saw more, honestly, dude, I saw more Trump ads than I saw Kamala Harris ads.
yeah,
I
fair
saw
enough.
way more Trump ads than I saw her want to pay for trans surgeries for prisoners.
Yeah.
I saw her want to, chop off more, apparently, foreign cocks in prison. Then I saw her say anything else, which I found, I wouldn't say shocking, but that to me was where I was like, oh yeah. If she can't constantly debate this man, this shit is over.
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't help that, like, that ad is a dramatic example, but there's like a lot of stuff that she said in the past that Trump would throw in her face. And since she just wasn't talking about those issues this time, right? So she didn't even really have a good response to it. It couldn't be like, oh, he's dredging up this stuff, but here's what I think instead of that, right? It's just like, she just shut up about that stuff. So it was a very easy narrative to be like, well, look, this is what she thinks, right? This is what she said a few years ago. But yeah, look, I think that if you look at the main campaign message, like what she said in speeches, what she said at the debates, I think that yeah, I mean, it's not that she never said anything about economics, but like even like the price gouging thing, like that, she brought it up. It was great, and then outside of some ads, it disappeared, right? Like she just stopped talking about it.
You can't compete with wanting to have all those surgeries.
You really want me to talk about
reasons.
tipping off the foreign cock? It's not going to happen.
No Medicare for all, but just in case you'd like to transition and you've committed a felony, well, do I have a plan for you, non-voter? And this is part of the communist agenda. That's what I got, but
it also really doesn't help that it was just so obvious that she doesn't actually like think anything, like she doesn't have any opinions. Like she's like, that's what, like, cause it's like, look, you can listen to the ad you're talking about, and think like, oh my God, she's really like gung ho to, to pay for all 6 transition surgeries for, undocumented immigrants in detention who are at, just the right point in their personal journeys, when they end up in that detention center, Spencer. And or you could listen to that and think, oh yeah, she was willing to say like whatever she thought people wanted to hear in 2019.
I mean, that's politicians 101, right? They're going to say whatever people want to hear.
Say whatever people want to hear now. And it's like, look, I mean, I think like, yeah, sure, you could say about a lot of politicians to one extent or another, right? But I think that like there are a lot of politicians where people think like, oh, I know what they care about, right? I know what, I know what issues move them. And it's like, Kamala Harris, look, I mean, you called me a Kamala hater earlier. I'm sure if if she like showed up at, my family's Thanksgiving gathering or whatever, we'd have a perfectly pleasant evening. I don't hate her.
It would take a while. I think McCushlick says here, there's a lot of merit to this. She came off distant and cold, didn't do enough everyday reach out. I'm just some loser, but seeming superior and distant doesn't work for her. I think you're right. I think it would take a while for everyone to warm up to her because there's something almost, I don't want to say fake, but fake about her joy, if you will. Like maybe she doesn't like regular people so much because she's kind of a bit of, how do you say elite? She's not elite in the sense of like Trump is an elite. But she's definitely PMC, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, this is like the funniest thing about the last couple of cycles, that like all of the Dems who most seem like they were grown in laboratories, Kamala, Pete Buttigieg, were like raised by Marxist academics.
Yeah, she doesn't feel to me as much as,
or whatever. I know her dad didn't really raise her, but
but no, but still, she never seemed as laboratory raised as Buttigieg, because him and what's the other guy, Beto O'Rourke, are such carbon copies of Obama that was the model to follow. And I don't know if she had a model to follow, because I don't think she followed the Hillary Clinton model. I think she tried to do something a little different. They tried to use her personality. I'm using finger quotation, personality. And her personality would have worked in spades had her and Trump got to do debates all over the country. But he was not going to have himself embarrassed by that woman after that first one, which, he did begrudgingly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. I think she did well in the debate. I mean, I'm sure she was a good prosecutor. But I also don't think that probably moved the needle much. I mean, like, it was like, yeah, she had a good night, rhetorically. But
you can't do it once. It's like touring. You can't do it once. You got to keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think there are like a lot of politicians where it's like even like Trump, right? I mean, it's like he obviously is somebody who, he's lied and, flip-flopped on all kinds of things. But I think people think they know what he cares about, right? Like some of it's awful, right? Wants to come down like the hammer of God, on like immigrants, who are just trying to live their lives, but like, at least they know what it is. And I think that, Kamala is one of these people, even if she seems less lab grown than, Pete or Beto. I mean, although I guess I do think that in a lot of ways what she was going for felt very Hillary-esque to me, but like, it's not, she still just seems like a pretty empty vessel. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know.
I can't disagree with that. She does. She just seems she seems like everybody's fucking district manager.
Yeah.
Right. She's the person you have to report to that, gives you the compliment sandwich.
Yeah, right. Totally. Right. It's like, whatever, it's fine. I mean, it's like, should be like not particularly unpleasant in that role. I mean, it's like, it still makes me laugh like once a month, that thing you texted me about how what did you say? She was like your mom's older black friend who quit smoking in the 80s, and and every year since you were 13, she gave you like a like aftershave, for
Yeah. You don't really have anything bad really to say about her. You're like,
sure,
I finally can use this aftershave 8 years later. Yeah. I totally did send you that message. Well, let's talk a little bit about, before we talk, we're done talking about broad. Let's talk about some other people.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So you want to move on to the really important subjects, like, we're gonna have to spend at least an hour on this. Like, is Sam Cedar a good guy or a bad guy? Like,
exactly. Is Sam Cedar the killer? Is it Sam Cedar in the basement with a lead pipe and a turkey leg?
Yeah. That is the most important political question. I don't care what you think about Medicare for all, unions, Palestine. I care whether you think that, that Sam is the good podcaster or the bad podcaster.
Yes. Is he saving us from another podcaster that might be worse?
Yeah.
How does the transformation of celebrity fandom into a quasi-political act illustrate the illusion of political engagement in the neoliberal context? Is it critique or is it just TMZ?
I've seen a lot of TMZ, I gotta say. Pretty openly, in some cases, people just doing TMZ, like, they're, be like, oh my God, did you see that some podcaster that 0.001% of Americans have heard of? Did you see what they said about some other podcaster that 0.001% of Americans have heard of? It's like the nerdiest form of TMZ, right?
You can't get a sex scandal out of them.
No.
Before we started, I watched a video about Puffy's son. I guess he got served papers for assaulting someone on the yacht. So we can't get good scandals. The closest we got was, who's the Chapo guy that like sent some messages?
Virgil Texas,
Yeah.
he was also Breonna Joygray's co-host. But it's like, even that, right? It's a sex scandal without any sex in it. It's just texting. It's pretty lame.
There's never anything scandalous. It does all seem, to me, it seems like nothing but TMZ. And when I look at, when I'm doing the video clips, uploading them to YouTube, and you have to log in. And so I log in. The account that the This Is Revolution account is not an account that I watch shows on.
Sure.
So I always see different things than what I usually watch. And when all the podcast shit comes up, I'm like, this is all just who said what about who.
Yeah. I mean, it's very, very much about that. And it's, look, in some ways, I guess I'm, as a professional haver of opinions.
An opinionist, dude.
I guess I'm flattered by the idea that, which opinion havers have is the most important question in the universe. But I've got to say, it's like an awkward fit with historical materialism. What do we what's our theory of change here? Right? Assuming that the goal, if you, call yourself a leftist and, you don't just mean a liberal, right? Then okay, I'm assuming that on some level, right, the goal is to bring about a more materially equal society. But if that's the case, then presumably the strategy is about organizing people from the bottom up, appealing to shared material interests, and it's really hard for me to see how this kind of micro dissection of the opinion is supposed to tie into that, right? And I'm not talking about actually dissecting ideas. I actually think, sure, right? Look, it's it'd be pretty hypocritical if I thought that was a waste of time, right? But the person, right? Because that's what so much of this stuff really seems to be about, right? It's not oh, here's why I disagree with I don't know, right? Give me an opinionist.
Jimmy Cedar.
Jimmy Cedar. Yeah. They got it. Jimmy Dore and Sam Cedar got into the machine from The Fly, and
Jimmy Cedar Gray. There you go. That's all of them in one.
Yeah. Look, if you think Jimmy Cedar Gray has a really bad take on some political issue, she is just totally out to lunch on it, and it's that's and that they're just wrong, right? That's look, yeah, sure, dissect the point, right? But it's I don't really understand what we're getting out of is Jimmy Cedar Gray a good guy or a bad guy, right? Man, I need to pick a gender pronoun for this person. I keep going back and forth.
It's they, them. By the way, Jimmy Cedar Gray is the they, them. So take that.
Okay. Fair enough.
Let's complicate. I want to complicate this so much that eventually we get canceled by making fun of a make-believe Hydra.
Yeah.
of
Okay.
fucking people that I don't want to talk to right now.
Apologies for misgendering Jimmy Cedar Gray. Yeah, they have a JSG.
And he works on a show called The Breaking Vanguard Points.
Yeah, because it's like, look, I don't know why I'm supposed to care about that, right? Like in other words, like, if Jimmy Cedar Gray has a bad idea, and we say, oh, Jimmy Cedar Gray said this, and here are my 5 objections to it. Okay, fair enough, right? It's like, we'll have it out. And presumably the point is that we're all trying to figure out what we should think about the topic, like the underlying topic under discussion, right? That it's like, Jimmy Cedar Gray, wants to, I don't even know. I think, but it's like, look, we think that the JSG, take is bad. And again, we presumably care about that because we're trying to figure out, like, I assume, right, the goal at some point is to build some kind of movement that could do things in the real world. And we're trying to figure out, like, what that movement's position on this issue should be. But, like, if it's like, oh, is Breaking Bad is JSG, like, is they are they like, oh, are they saying something different from what they said 5 years ago? Is JSG, moving to the right? That it's like, I don't understand what that's supposed to have to do with politics, right? Like, like that's not, I mean, unless it's just like, oh, well, that's one fewer vote we can count on, when they complete their transition to the right.
I love the transition to the right. It's my favorite thing is the idea that you can jettison something that you've built for, in a person like Sam Cedar's case, for decades, right? Not just in the online sphere, but being one of the few voices on the only left-leaning or liberal radio station at one point in time. And I know that might seem like ancient history to a lot of people, but him, Chuck D, Rachel Maddow was Chuck D's producer, right? Who else was on the show? Mark Maron.
Well, Janine Garofalo was the original.
Janine Garofalo was the bigger name on that show.
Yeah, exactly. Like Sam, I think, was like Janine.
He was like Emma Vigeland.
Yes, Sam was the Emma Vigeland when Janine Garofalo was like the main host of the Air America radio version of the Majority Report, which is some like deep podcasting lore that I'm probably going to like is just pointlessly taking up space up here. That's like, it's like all kinds of things that'd be much more useful to know, are being dislodged by that. But there we go. Kamala's going to pay for illegal aliens to transit.
These comments, because we're streaming on both channels, they're flying in and they're all pretty fucking funny. And poor Spencer is trying to have a serious conversation, and all these people are around him just saying crazy shit.
Yeah.
So, hold on, Spencer. We're going to get to some serious shit in a second. Just
yeah.
To what extent does cancel culture serve as a substitute for meaningful political action? How does it reinforce neoliberal norms? How has social media allowed us to create a bit of a prison of thought? If there is a left consensus on any issue, is it deemed a heel turn or a grift if you go against that position? How do we get beyond the grift discourse? Preach, Ben Burgis.
Fair enough. Well, if I'm going to preach, I insist that like once every 3 sentences or so, you say, "Yep, that's right." Good deacon, right? That's the person who does that, I think. I don't know. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think like the grifting part of that is interesting because it seems to me, I mean, this is kind of like, I don't know. You remember a few years ago, I wrote this book about Christopher Hitchens, and one of the reasons that I was doing that, one of the reasons I thought it'd be like interesting to like think and write about this guy is that, somebody who did have, in certain respects, it's complicated, but, a right-wing turn. But I always wanted to like try to think a little bit more about why, right? Like in other
Mm,
words, all these explanations I've seen people give for like what happened there, right? Is like, oh, he like, basically he took the bag, right? It's like, oh, it's the he just liked the limelight or whatever. It's like, okay, maybe, but like what you're just ruling out a priori is that somebody could just sincerely come to conclusions we don't like, right? Like
yeah.
you're sort of assuming that everybody in the universe deep down knows that we're right about everything. And if they're, especially if they used to agree with us and now they disagree with us, then that must mean that somebody paid them to like lie, right? That, that it can't actually be that they just like earnestly came to conclusions that we don't like. And I always really hated that because it's like, well, I think that's a horrible, like if you care about persuasion, I think that's a horrible way to look at things because, I think if you want to persuade people to agree with you, I think that you have to be willing to get inside their heads a little bit and like kind of try to figure out why somebody might disagree with us, right? And if it's like,
Yeah.
well, you just must be a shill, right? Like, or,
Which to me always felt weird because when you have a like the conversation we started the show with, right?
yeah,
Where I say, well, I don't agree with that. It
yeah.
doesn't mean that I love Kamala Harris,
No,
but
that's
there's this
another,
oversimplification of thought because we are in a moment of everything has to be debunked,
right. Yeah.
right? Here's the real story of everything. And which I'm gonna which let's get into that for the next question because I think
Yeah.
this will kind of
What I got out of it was that you love Kamala Harris and you hate me.
damn, someone's gonna say that. Yeah, that guy really likes Kamala Harris. Like, no, not really. Why'd you think that? It's kind of an observation. No, can't have like you can't have an observation
Yeah.
unless your observation is like just fucking kill everybody. All right, well that's silly, and you're not gonna do it. Like,
Yeah.
come on.
No,
Um,
and it is also just one last point about this, right? Like I always think Matt Chrisman, the first time I ever interviewed him, which was actually pre GTAA, that was when I was co-hosting the Dead Pundit Society with Adam Proctor,
oh wow.
and that was yeah, it was actually really weird. Matt was on Chapo and he told some story. Like he had some story about a comedian and he like slightly misremembered the guy's name. I don't even remember the actual person, but it was like Ben something is the real name of the comedian, but he kept calling him Ben Burgis. And like, so he, over the course of the story, he referred to this guy as Ben Burgis like 20 times. And so I, like added him on Twitter. I was like, hey, I think we're different people.
You know the comedian? You don't even know the comedian.
I literally don't even remember. It was like was it the guy who did like the taxi cab confessions or
I
anyway.
don't even know who the fuck that guy was.
Anyway, I don't
Yeah.
remember.
Johnny John, yeah.
But anyway, that ended up leading to this conversation where he came on the show, and we had, I actually still love that. It was like one of my favorite all-time favorite podcast interviews, but that I've done, right? But in there, he had this great line about how like we spend all this time like the online left, right? Which is a depressing but accurate combination of words, right? That's what it is.
Yeah.
Spends all this time like coming to consensus about things. Not Ben Glebe. That him I know. But spends all this time maybe coming to coming to consensus about things and deciding like what our position is, and then trying to enforce that position by like drawing this like political hygiene line outside of it and being like, you only count, right? You're only in the club. You're only on the left if you agree with us about this. And it's like, look, within those spaces, that could actually be pretty effective, right? It's like, lots of people will, like buckle under with there. But then you try to go out into the world and like that doesn't work anymore because like any normal person is like, well, I wasn't around when you guys all decided that this was the correct position, right? Like, why do I care if I'm in your club or not, right? So,
like what's interesting when we talk about like grifting. I never hear people bring up politicians' names. that totally like Kamala Harris is a perfect example,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
Someone that, what do you people want? Medicare for all? Yeah, I'm all for it. Oh, I'm a serious contender now for the title. Not necessarily for it. Like I said before, I was for it in a different way.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, politicians, I think you can obviously, make a much better case, right? Because like they're way more likely to just like, yeah, they're way more likely to just say that they believe shit because it's convenient at the time than because than like some nerd who has a podcast. I mean, like that person actually probably really does believe whatever they're saying.
And here's a good example, like Tulsi Gabbard. I think you and I were talking about this the other day when we were hanging out, where someone like Tulsi Gabbard never really was that far in a direction, and where she is now to me makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
She could be Bernie friendly. Oh, this isn't going to work out. I can hitch my wagon to something else because I'm not too far. And that's what I think people don't understand. Is a figure like that really sits in the middle more than I think people think, because the Joe Rogans of the world start doing backflips over the fact she says she doesn't like a war. Right?
Yeah, totally. Which is funny because I'm old enough to remember when Barack Obama was president, and Tulsi Gabbard would sometimes go on the television to say, "I'm a Democrat, but I think it's outrageous that Obama won't use the phrase radical Islamic terrorism. We're supposed to, fight it if we don't say the magic words."
I
Also,
think I wrote it. I think I didn't mention that exact thing, but I did write the thing. I think I mentioned something about going in the Wayback Machine to when Barack Obama was still a socialist in the eyes of Fox News.
yeah. Ben Bailey. Thank you, Kushlik. That's who it is. Ben Bailey was the guy who Crispin kept calling Mad Ben Burgis.
Ben Bailey. Don't know who that is.
No worries, you should.
Good. Thank you for not making me feel bad. Figures like Anna Kasparian have been labeled as grifters or traitors to the left. I think we have to address this because if we don't, we're going to see it in the comments. We're going to see it in the comments anyway. Most of those comments I won't read. Does she matter? In the case of the Venezuelan gang takeover, should this be an issue we're trying to parse? If so, is the reaction of TYT more of a response to the virtual gulag than it is about the coverage of the story? And how should the left attempt to view these stories in the first place? How does this dynamic hinder coalition building and substantive debate?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's. It feels a little bit funny to say, does Anna Kasparian matter? I mean, it's like saying, does Jason Miles matter? In both cases, because I mean, Anna's a good friend in real life, right? So she matters to me, but I don't think that's what you're asking. Yeah, look, I think that it's. I think she matters, or you matter, or I matter. Insofar as like take what these people say seriously, and think about it and decide whether you agree with it or not. Right? I mean, that's kind of all there is to do with it, right? But again, I'm just not that interested in the sort of eternal, I care. I care about the issue, right? I don't know that I care that much about whether somebody's on the I don't know. I mean, you have a like you could tell me tomorrow that you're a Republican now, and I'd be very surprised, right? I would have a lot of questions. We would get into many arguments about it, right? It wouldn't be like, oh, well, I don't know, I hate Jason now. It would just be like, oh, okay, well, that's very surprising. Here's why I disagree, right? And I will also say, I don't, as far as Anna goes, I mean, the things that I care the most about, I actually think what she says about is still very, much what I what I like, right, about labor unions, about Palestine, et cetera. On the Venezuela story, like, I think you've spent more time looking into this than I have. In fact, I know you have, because like you sent me like a video the other day that I did not watch because it was like 45 minutes, and there's only so many hours in a day. And so I'm
too busy watching the RNC again.
Okay, but I was paid to watch the RNC. I wrote an article, right? So, I mean, if I'm fielding offers now for how much I'm going to get paid to watch this video, now I'm willing to consider it.
I'll give you one of these cold beers in the refrigerator.
Yeah, I don't know.
They're not the good ones; they're the cheap ones. But
all right, I'll watch the first 5 minutes of the.
That's all you need.
Yeah, but no, look, in all seriousness, I think that the Venezuela gang story, right, this Colorado, I'm not going to pretend I know all the details of this. I do not, right? But I think that the general thing is there were these stories about this gang that had taken over some apartment complexes. And then initially a lot of people were like, oh, there's nothing to this. This is just right-wing hysteria. And then it even seemed like some of the same people who've been saying that before were backing off from a little bit. It's like, okay, there's something to this, but it's overstated. And I don't know, like you can get into these like weird arguments about what counts as taking over, right? Like,
I think we first have to admit there's no such thing as a gang takeover of anything. The wording of that was fucking retarded.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
from jump, right? The whole thing. When I hear gang takeover of an apartment complex, I'm getting my popcorn ready to watch New Jack City.
Well,
and
yeah,
you've never seen New Jack City, have you?
I have not.
You having an unnatural allegiance to losers is not like you.
Don't do that again. But
I mean, I like that. I watched, some things are just audio. I listened to your appearance on the What's Left podcast, and
Jesus, what did I say there?
And so when you talk about getting popcorn and crime, that's what I think of, right? That you said in that podcast that when there were police raids on the crowd.
Oh yeah. My stepmom did. She did. My stepmom, rest in peace. My stepmom did make popcorn for my cousin and I, who I hope is watching Keenan Foster, and we did watch the crack house raids, and it did look like Benny Hill. They bust out the back and they'd run around. The cops would chase them and be like,
I don't know. I mean, because people I don't really know what that means, right? Taking over. It's like people talk about I guess, people even talk about different gangs, even with who gets to sell drugs where, right? They'll talk about taking over territory from the other gang. I have no idea.
But here's the thing. This is how I wanted people to listen.
Sure.
The whole conversation to me was bullshit, right? The gang takeover, this is all fake news. And there were some interesting issues within that got the whole story out there in the first place with the kind of corrupt landlord. But there was a gang problem, is a gang problem in the area.
Yeah, I mean, there were people who were getting beaten up or extorted, by this gang in these apartments, right? So it's even if you don't want to call it a takeover, it's not a it's not a nothing, right? And I guess to me that's what seems like the more important thing. It's because to me it's I don't know, who got what exactly happened this place. You're in a better position than I am to weigh in on that, because again, I did not watch the video, but I think there is a more general issue here about how left media talks about crime, right? And that's maybe what I care a little bit more about, right? Because I am worried about us talking about it in a way that means that people who live in areas where crime is a big problem, which I'm sorry, is a lot of people, right? A lot of people in the sort of left's natural base, right? A lot of poor and working class people live in areas where they actually are really worried about crime. That's a fact, right? And I worry that we kind of overcorrect from like, look, we all know Fox News, whatever, like how they cover it. But it's like, I worry that like we're so defensive about that stuff that we end up like coming off as if we just don't think it's a problem at all, or like that like anybody who like seems to be too alarmed by it has just been a victim of propaganda or whatever. And I think that like on the larger, like if we can sort of move on from the like, you know, our Anna Kasparian and Jason Miles and Jimmy Cedar Gray going to hell or heaven, right? You know, that like it's like, I don't, you know, who's a good person, who's a bad person, right? And like just think about the larger issue. I think that there's a real danger in sort of ceding that to the right. So it's like anybody who does think that's a big problem, it's like, well, these guys just don't seem to give a shit about it at all. So like, therefore we should, you know, the people who, you know, even if their solutions are like pretty grotesque, right? Like it's like these people are offering us something, right? So we should go with them.
That seems to be the problem, right? Because everything you say when you bring up the word crime, unless you say crime doesn't exist, or the numbers are down, or you compare it to the worst time in the last 40 years of history and say, well, it's better than when it was really fucking horrible.
Yeah,
so
the 1990s, which like I think
when I was watching those crack house raids.
Exactly. Like I think that people, yeah, the way people talk about that, it's like, okay, well, it's not as bad as the 90s. Like, do you remember how bad
get a better bar. I'm always like, get a better bar. Your bar is low. And also the ad hominem attack of that's a right-wing talking point is meant to shut down anything you say. So even if I say, hey, there's a lot of crime in area X, right? Like I can say without a question of a doubt, and you can agree with this, I live in statistically a very violent area, allegedly, but I don't lock my door.
Well, you also live on the top of a hill on a dirt road.
Regardless, on this same hill, in that house across the street from you that hasn't been rented out since we both moved here, that apparently was a house that the cartel kept hostages. And at one point, hostages got free and ran out. And there were people taped up with their hands and they ran out. My landlord's husband got shot in the stomach because someone was trying to break in their garage. That all happened in this area probably 15, 20 years ago, right? That being said, I was talking to a woman that lived further inland. That reality was a stark contrast from where we live. Everybody had gates. Everybody had bars on their windows. The dogs in that neighborhood, a little bit different than the wild dogs in this neighborhood. Motherfucker tried to bite me in the ass. What I'm saying is, from my vantage point, it's very easy for me to say everything is fine here. Tijuana is great. Nothing to see here. But bad shit does happen here. Some people do have fears here. Like the police presence in the areas in which we live is huge. When you go inland, good luck finding any sort of cop. And that's how the 90s and 80s looked for a lot of people. If everybody loves Public Enemy, one of their hugest hits in the 90s was 911 as a joke. Because if you did call, nobody was coming to save you.
Remember that song?
If someone did, when LAPD thought that there was a gang takeover in an apartment complex in 86, they destroyed that entire building to find nothing.
Yeah.
So the illusion, when you hear the term gang takeover and you see the imagery, it's shocking. But my first thought is, there's no domestic gang that has the political clout to keep law enforcement at bay.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you mean by takeover, I think that's true.
Right? There's no Venezuelan gang coming up right now. I'm not saying there aren't gangs. There's just not one right now that's going to take over an apartment in, was it Boulder? Or no, it wasn't Boulder. It was somewhere in Colorado. I don't think it was Boulder. Aurora, thank you. Definitely wasn't Boulder.
And I didn't even watch the video. Yeah. I mean, look, I think that I think that a few things can be true here. One, I think that obviously, if look, the last thing I want is to go back to the kind of Clinton era crime policies of lock them up and throw away the key, which unfortunately I think is a very real possibility because I think that there's no reason that pendulum couldn't swing back, right? Could totally happen, but also I think that people are so used to, in our kind of political space, crime is down, right? As as a sort of conversation ender, right?
Mhm.
That I really think that's a mistake because, okay, first of all, even on that metric, I mean, that's crime is down nationally in the state, in the city, right? In a neighborhood, right? As not all these things necessarily march side by side, but also even if it is, it's I don't know. I mean, we have after Obamacare was passed, the rate of people being uninsured was way down, right? But we didn't say, oh, well, in that case, people not having health insurance isn't a problem anymore, right? Because it's down, right? I would think that what you'd be tracking, right, as somebody who wants a better, more materially equal society is, why is it that anywhere in the spectrum of the ups and downs of the crime rate in the US, when it's at its lowest ebb, we still have crazily higher rates of murder and violent crime than any normal first world country, right? And so it's again, this is something I think it's not there's a reason why so many working class people talk about lists say in polls they think this is a major concern. It's not just they've been propagandized oh, they don't know crime is down because they haven't they're watching the wrong news channels. They're not tuning in to Jimmy Cedar Gray to get the truth.
Jimmy Cedar Gray will tell you that the statistics say
there's
nothing to see here.
Right. And that doesn't mean oh, we should we should do we should all we should all put up the was the Blue Lives Matter flag, right? That's not at all the point, right? But I just think that minimizing the issue is a bad idea. I mean, I actually think there is there is something we can I think the main thing is just to say, look, why is it that there's so much more violent crime in the U.S. than there is in other first world countries, and that has something to do with what a brutally unequal society we have, right? That we've got tremendous poverty and degradation, side by side with wealth, that which is the combination that tends to lead to a lot of crime, and there are all kinds of things even sort of very modestly social democratic things actually would help with that. I mean, jobs programs, obviously, even even pretty incremental stuff actually has been shown to minimum wage increases and stuff actually have been shown,
which California voted against. There's look, if you think about this conversation, and this woman made a right-wing pivot and blah 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 blah, there is no crime and rates are down, blah blah blah. All you have to do is look at what people voted for in places like California. In cities that were on fire over the fact that they thought that police brutality was a problem, literally had people calling the NAA, or the NAACP literally sent a letter to the city of Oakland and said, please don't fire any cops. The people that voted, that campaigned to defund the police, half of those people wrote a letter to the Oakland Police Department and said, please don't fire any cops. Because we're having a problem. And my point here is, if you don't have a way to truly talk about this, then the conversation does get seated to the right, because they have a wonderful way to talk about it. And they talk about it in the sense, look, everything's failing you because Democrats failed you. Look at the cities. Look at the disintegration of it. How much money do you think these homeless people get? And look at what they're doing. This is what Democrats want. It's because everybody knows Republicans is the tough on crime people, and they lock people up. And for a moment, just 4 years ago, we thought that we could have a better world and people should be housed. That was a big reason why we're using hotels as housing facilities, was because of COVID. People said we can't leave the most vulnerable of us susceptible to a pandemic. And now it's like, well, fucking lock them up. Fuck them. Double fuck them. Just like that. And that is the consensus. We have rolled back laws that were put into place because prisons were so overcrowded, people were dying in them in California. And now we've rolled back these laws to say, no. Just build more. We don't give a fuck.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I guess I haven't checked every single one point by point, but my impression is that everything I voted against passed, and everything I voted
right. And you were looking at it like, there's no way in the fucking world anyone's going to vote for this.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, let's can we raise the minimum wage? No. Can we keep prison slavery legal? Oh yeah.
Like, yeah. Oh, no problem.
Like, no, it's fucking dystopian, and I mean it tells me that the right is winning the war for hearts and minds in fucking California right now, right? Like, I mean, this is pretty dire, and I do think that there's a structural problem here that people don't want to think about. And I'm not saying like I have some genius solution to this problem. I'm just saying it's a problem. You got to acknowledge it, right? Which is that in order, like, if you have some kind of baseline materialism about this stuff, right, that you do think that not the only explanation for everything, but like, the main thing going on here is ultimately economic, then, if you want a lower crime rate, then you need to tackle that. But of course, tackling that, again, even in sort of like piecemeal social democratic ways, would involve taking power at least the state level, right? If not federally. And of course, that's well beyond the capacity of the left right now, right? But it's like, yeah, several years ago, it's like, oh yeah, you know what we could swing is DA elections in certain very blue cities. And the problem is that I worry that the order of operations is wrong here, right? If you scale back the carceral state in where you have the power to do so, but you haven't done anything about the underlying material conditions that make crime bad, then I think you're really setting yourself up for a backlash. And I think we've seen that, because look, in principle, I think we can have both, right? I mean, we can have I don't know. I mean, even under capitalism, like Norway, right? Like is they don't, they haven't collectivized the means of production, but they have much stronger unions and a much more generous welfare state than we do, and they've also got a way nicer criminal justice system than we do. Like no death penalty. They don't even really have life in prison. Anders Breivik is going to get out someday, right? Because everybody eventually gets out, in Norway. Prisons kind of look like dorm rooms, right? Like every time you see somebody take a camera into one of them. But they have a way lower crime rate because the material conditions are better, right? So that is totally possible. I just think that the way we've been kind of going about it, I understand why, I understand where it comes from, but it's like that the sort of it's like, oh, you kind of grab at these DA races when you can. I think is kind of maybe long-term a recipe for disaster.
This is kind of the epitome of the comment I'm talking about right here. When has the left downplayed the material conditions that make crime? If you're talking to a person that lives in a high crime area, who gives a shit about what causes what? Because that's not going to fix it tomorrow.
Well, yeah, I don't think the left has played down the material conditions. I think the left has played down the crime.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, how are you going to fix this tomorrow? Are you going to midnight basketball? What are you going to fucking do? I want to know what your plan is. And if you don't have one, then I don't want to listen to you. And the person that comes in and says, I'm going to come in here and make sweeping changes, those are the people that most people listen to. If you've never had bullets whiz by, if you've never had shit broken into constantly because of where you live, if you've never feared to walk to school, then maybe you live in a pretty good area.
Yeah.
Maybe these aren't concerns of yours. And maybe you can think about the left and what they say right or wrong, right? And what they always do right. One thing I have noticed, and apparently everyone else has noticed too, you just heard Ben Burgis say, well, everything I voted for in California got voted down. People that, again, just 4 years ago were like, oh, this is a problem with the police. We don't want police in schools. That was celebrated to get police out of schools. Now these same people are like, well, can you bring the cops back in schools?
Yeah. Yep. You know, because it's all downstream of the more basic problem, right? So yeah, if you haven't tackled that, you know, then it's really hard to see, you know, what can be done about this. And yeah, I think that this is man, this is depressing me. I want to go back to I want to go back to talking about how Jimmy Cedar Gray is a fucking sellout.
Because well, that's the thing that's depressing about it, is because, you know, people get mad because like, well, I didn't say it. It's like, look, dude, here's the reality.
Yeah.
For a moment, we were like, the police sucks. And a lot of people got elected to city council positions. We cared about left DAs that wanted to abolish bail. And once the narrative changed just a little bit, no one knew how to handle it. And usually people said things that don't resonate with people that are dealing with bullshit. Like, crime rates are actually down. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Well, I'm talking about my car got broke into and someone stole my shit. So fuck right off. And not a lot of people like that.
Yeah. No,
You're flippant in your responses.
Yeah, exactly. If you tell people that the thing that like is manifestly an issue in their lives that that makes it worse and that they're concerned about is like, why are you making such a big deal about it? The rate is down. That like, yeah, it's not a, you know, it's not a winning message. And I mean, I think maybe to, you know, to take things back to, you know, like your essay, that I think it says a lot about where this message is formulated, right? You know, that in other words, like it's not coming out of like big working class institutions like, you know, labor unions or, you know, or you know, mass socialist or communist political parties. Not that we have those in the United States, you know, which is part of the problem, but it's been formulated on the internet, right? I mean, and it's been formulated among people who tend to form their politics through like this very reactive internet stuff. That's like, you know, who said what, and what are the vibes of what someone said, and you know, does that you know, do I get right wing vibes from that? You know, like that. It's all, you know, it's all about making sure that your enemies are wrong on the internet, and that's just not something that's going to translate into political positions that are terribly useful when you try to take them into the broader world and, you know, and build something there.
I mean, again, a city like San Francisco that had a pretty tough on crime mayor that was very excited to get the socialist DA out of office. She got ousted in the election by a tougher on crime gajillionaire. Again, you know, if you don't have good messaging on this, if your messaging is just stats,
yeah,
then maybe you should rethink the statistical analysis.
Yeah, it's, well, you know, actually what it reminds me of is, you know, I've been seeing people talk about Matt Iglesias the last few days. Nathan Robinson wrote an article about him, and you know, it's been kind of around, and it's like the kind of thing that people like Matt Iglesias will say. These like sort of centrist pundits, whose whole brand is that they're the reasonable people, right? That like be like, you're talking about how like there's all this economic misery, but like actually, low wage workers had their wages rise more under Biden than, in these other years or these other categories of the population, right? So it's like, essentially, what are you complaining about, right?
Yeah.
It's like what's the difference, right? It's the same thing, right? That you're saying like, it's like, yeah, it's like, actually low wage workers have done quite well, right? Because you got, you went from being paid, $10 an hour to being paid 10 and a quarter, right? And that's, next year you might be paid 10.50, right? That's what are you complaining about? Like, it's like, look, people, like, the question is, I mean, certainly if you're trying to convince people to do things like win elections, never mind something more ambitious, like building up like an organized working class movement that could, make more fundamental changes in society. The people who get to decide whether, the progress that's been made is enough or not are the people who you're trying to win over. Right. I mean, like, and so it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, sure. Wages, went up more in the bottom, decile or whatever in the recovery under Biden, than other deciles. That's fine. Are people still really frustrated about their economic conditions? If so, right, like then the first thing isn't your excuse, isn't like doesn't give you a pass, right? And it's like the same thing here. It's like, okay, that's nice, it's the crime is down, crime is down from last year, but the person who just got their car broken into is still gonna be pissed off about it.
Yeah, but fuck that guy.
Yeah,
crime rate's down.
Yeah, exactly. Like that should not be the discussion ender.
Right.
If like whatever you actually ultimately think the position should be, if that's treated as the discussion ender, right? All you're interested in is like owning people that you're arguing with. You're not interested in trying to persuade people that you have some kind of platform that could help them.
Speaking of platforms, you wrote an article in Damage magazine called "Is Trump Hitler or Just Woodrow Wilson?"
Yeah.
And why do you find the framing Trump as a fascist is misleading? And how does this narrative divert left priorities? Give us an argument, if you will.
Sure. So maybe I'm being too much of an analytical philosopher about this, but whenever I see somebody say Trump is a fascist, or for that matter, I see somebody say anyone's a fascist, my first question is always going to be, okay, well, what definition of fascism are you working with, right? Explain it to me. Because look, if you're using it as an insult, that's fine, right? Like, I don't know, a few years ago, you and I and Jean Bajalan were driving up to Canada for Deep State's wedding, and we had this whole interaction with this border guard who's been an asshole. And, and like once we finally crossed over and we were driving around Vancouver, we're all joking about it. And like, I think I had this whole thing about how it was going to be a kids show called The Adventures of Fascist Jack.
Fascist Jack, the border guard. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, look, if you're just using it as an insult, fine, right? I'm not going to police like what like jokey insults anybody uses. I don't have the slightest problem with that, right? But
I'm so mad you remember Fascist Jack, though. God damn.
I'm not going to forget that.
Were you asleep in the car and did I wake you up with like yelling at the guy?
No, I was actually awake at that point. I was asleep for a lot of Vancouver, but I was awake during the Fascist Jack interaction.
I did yell at a border guard. By the way. I have yelled at Ben's been around for my yelling at law enforcement before.
Yes, and I was convinced that we were going to be there until 5 a.m. It's just
you knew your asshole was finna
get into deep cavity search. It's like, God damn it, Jason! I really want to just get through this so we can get up to Vancouver and go to sleep. But yeah, so it's like, look, I mean, if you're just using it as an insult, like it's just kind of like an expressive way of saying that like somebody is like, really sucks in certain ways, fine, right? But if you say, no, I literally think he's a fascist, then I want to know, what do you mean by fascist? And at least in the Marxist tradition, there are a couple of big ways of thinking about what fascism is, what makes fascism fascism. So certainly what influenced me the most is probably, so Leon Trotsky wrote a bunch of essays about the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, which are collected into a book called Fascism, what it is and how to fight it. And basically what Trotsky says is what fascism is, as like he emphasizes this like street fighting mass movement of like brown shirts or black shirts or whatever the equivalent is in different countries, who would like scrape in the streets with socialists and communists and bust up labor union halls and all this stuff. And then, when the movement took power, they would destroy the normal institutions of bourgeois democracy, ban labor unions and opposition parties, and supplement or even partially replace the traditional repressive apparatus of the state with their own forces, right? So if that's what you think is fascism is, right, then it's really hard for me to see how Trumpism fits the bill. I mean, you have these like kind of pathetic microscopic grouplets like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and stuff who like, honestly, yeah. So
they seem like ops.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that you add all those groups together and there are like 400 of those guys in the entire country and probably like 250 of them are FBI informants, right?
Yeah.
So like, that's probably like, I don't think those are really people are really terrorizing their enemies. I mean, alternately, you could say, okay, maybe Trotsky's wrong. You go with like the sort of mainstream of the communist movement in the 30s. There's Georgy Dimitrov, who was like the Comintern's theorist of fascism, who said that fascism is the open terroristic dictatorship of the most reactionary representatives of finance capital or something like that. I might be getting that slightly wrong. It's like, okay, well, so that's a definition. It's not like Trotsky's definition. It's not about how fascism comes to power. It's about what it does when it gets there. So in that sense, if you want to say Trump is a fascist, that sounds like that definition can be more helpful to you because it sort of doesn't matter whether you come to power by like doing a march on Rome or, beating Nikki Haley in Iowa. But then like that open terroristic dictatorship, the, most extreme, blah, blah, blah. Nobody really seems to expect that Trump is going to do that stuff. I mean, like, in fact, even people who do insist that he's a fascist, like, I mean, there are certainly some people, usually libs rather than leftists, to be fair, but there are some people who really do think that. Like, I mean, Rachel Maddow at one point, was like, "Oh, I'm worried that I'm going to be sent to a camp, right, if Trump wins." She actually did say that, but so there is stuff
She
like
really
that,
thought that.
apparently, or
Just say, let's Chris Matthews, right?
yeah,
Bernie Sanders wins. They're gonna put my dick on a dick grading machine. That's what Sanders is gonna do.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like some people, but most people will be like, "Oh no. I'm not saying that Trump is going to like ban the Democratic Party and declare himself president for life and have death camps for his political enemies and all that stuff," because that was like old European fascism, and this is like 21st century American fascism. It's going to have its own characteristics and be different, right? That's the kind of thing people will say. But then it's like, okay, but like, what makes both of those fascism? Like at this point, are you just using the word fascism to mean like right wing and very bad? And I find that pretty unconvincing. And could go on forever about this because I'm a nerd and I've spent too much time thinking about it, right? But like, I think maybe the more interesting half of your question is about the politics of it, because it's like, okay, like what are we actually like politically signaling when we insist on this? Like what's the political valence of this? And it seems to me that the politics of the Trumpism is fascism thing is basically three things, right? One is it's whitewashing previous conservatives by saying, oh, there's like a sharp break between that, right? These aren't just regular conservatives.
Well, Bush Jr. used to be a fascist, right?
Yes, I am old enough to remember Bush Jr. being a fascist. I am old enough to remember the people who were like the 2000s equivalent of Never Trump Republicans being like, oh, he's not a real Republican. He's this like crazy new dangerous thing, right? So yeah, totally, right. But it's like now the sort of, oh, Trumpism is fascism. Again, it tends to be like, oh, he's not just like the older conservatives. He's this really radically different thing. in a way that like really whitewashes these like monsters who like, George did. I mean, look, Trump is still in competition. He could still take the gold,
He's trying. He's training.
Exactly. He's training hard.
He's training really hard.
When he's doing the YMCA dance and stuff, right? I mean, he's keeping himself in shape, for that, right? So it's like, look, don't get me wrong. I'm sure Trump is going to do all kinds of horrible shit in the next 4 years. He's in competition still, right? But like, at least if we're going to compare Bush's presidency to Trump round one, right? Bush did way more damage. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, that's the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. I mean, Afghanistan was the longest war in American history. The Patriot Act, indefinite detention, torture. We like openly tortured people. It was enhanced interrogation, right? It wasn't even a secret, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So like, I think that's one. And then two, I think especially, I mean, this is kind of in the quote that you read at the beginning of the episode. In intra-left contexts, I think that the effect of this is literally fascism discourse is to encourage people to sort of de-emphasize fighting with neoliberal centrists about economic stuff, because like, this is an emergency, right? We've all got to rally around and, defend like the basics of procedural democracy against this urgent fascist threat. Which is I think a total disaster, because I think that you like the only thing that I think can ultimately long term beat this kind of right wing pseudo populism is something better from the left that's going to address the underlying economic issues. And then the third is that I think seeing it leads to people thinking about this stuff in apocalyptic terms in a way that's really bad for the work of actually winning over, the 49.9% of Americans who voted for Trump, right? Like there's no possible way we could realign American politics in the way that we need to even do like really basic social democratic things without winning over like a ton of those people, right? I mean, this is especially this time, right? Like Trump won voters who made under $50,000 a year. He didn't win them by much, but like, that's still a pretty dramatic turnaround, because Dems usually win those voters like very handily. He made like, I mean, there are all the racial stats that I think are kind of mostly downstream of that, right? That that he won much bigger percentages of the Black and Latino vote than, especially the Latino vote than he had the last two times, never mind, Romney or McCain, or any of these people. And I worry that it's like, look, to the extent that people take seriously these like really apocalyptic metaphors, that it's like, it's literally Hitler. I worry that leads people to like be much more open to this kind of like real line in the sand, like demonization of anybody who supports Trump, because like, look, I mean, if Trump is literally Hitler, I mean, like certainly, if you grew up watching like movies about World War II, which is to say, if you're like an American, right? Like, I mean, we know how you defeat Hitler, right? Like that's the story about that, right? I mean, it's like, we're going to like reenact World War II somehow, right? It's very confusing, but it's like, that's, like if somebody is a Nazi collaborator, do you try to get Nazi collaborators to join your trade union and, kind of slowly win them over on, more political questions? Like it seems like such a, it seems like such an over the top frame to look at it from. I think it's like really conducive to just writing off this huge section of the population. Whereas I think there are much more grounded metaphors that like, I mean, one of this snarkier section titles in the article was perhaps the left could learn a second analogy. And, it's like, look, yeah, a lot of what Trump says it's going to do is very horrible, right? No doubt about it. And don't get me wrong. I'm actually like I'm slightly personally concerned about some of the stuff that Trump says he wants to do, right? Like, he's floated many times the idea of doing some kind of military intervention in Mexico, which I don't love. I'm doing this as you are, from I'm a few doors down from you in Mexico. Spend a lot of my time here, and he's said a lot of things that I think add up to a promise to do a third Red Scare, right, in universities. I mean, like he said, he said like that. The GOP platform, right? It's got this whole all caps section that I think a bunch of people said reads like a list of Trump's shower thoughts. And it's like, oh, build a giant missile, shield over America, all paid for, all built by American labor. It's all shit like that, right? And one of the all caps bullet points is deport pro-Hamas radicals and make campuses safe and patriotic again.
That was the thing that made me go, because there's a few things that he will carry out, right? And we saw it in 2016 with the kids in cages and the separation and using that old, I can't remember the act it was they used to do the child separation in the first place. And that kind of blew up in his face.
Yeah.
Because the optics of it were so bad. And I don't know if people remember, we didn't see images of it. You just heard Congress people talking about it because images weren't coming out.
Mm-hmm.
There's audio that's come out from it, but the images we saw, we didn't really see images like we see of other horrible atrocities that have happened in the last 8 years. And that was one of the things that got sanctuary cities. Everybody wanted to, Kamala Harris became a big name because she was like, California is going to not allow Donald Trump to, this liberal strategy of calling Trump a fascist, the broad coalition building they're trying to do against Trump. How does that die? And this is the last thing I want to ask you before we go to the champagne room. How does this dilute the leftist economic agendas?
Yeah. I mean, look, because I think that, I think that there's a pretty obvious logic to if the fascists are literally coming, right? That everything else has to be secondary to stopping that, right? Like that's the, that's clearly, if, just regular bourgeois democracy is about to go away, we're about to have fascism, then work together with anybody, anywhere, right, to stop that, right? And I think that that's certainly like the story that, I think in lots of ways, like a lot of us have internalized. I mean, that's, the Popular Front against fascism, in the 1930s, which is also something, by the way, I think is a big part of what's going on here, that I think people love these analogies because it lets everybody relive their faction's glory years, right? It's like, never Trump Republicans get to feel like little Churchills, libs get to feel like little FDRs. Most leftists these days don't like Stalin very much, but whatever. We get to feel like the socialists and the, pumping, the glorious Popular Front against fascism, right? So I think that tends to it's like the state of exception, right? People like political theorists will talk about, right? When a lot of normal laws can just be suspended because you've got an emergency, right? I mean, this is like kind of a state of exception for the left. That's like that, that like all of the priorities go by the wayside, for defending, democracy against fascism, but, which I think is kind of a disaster, right? I mean, like we just saw, right? I mean, think about the last election that we just finished, right? That one of the really striking differences between 2016, 2020, and 2024 is that healthcare was basically a non-issue in the 2024 election. It was barely brought up, right? There was I think almost the only thing about healthcare that anybody is even going to remember from the election is Trump saying he had the concepts of a plan. It was just more absent than would sort of be almost possible to imagine after 2016 and 2020, right? Because there was no left candidate in the race. And like, if you want any evidence that that the issue itself hasn't gone anywhere, I mean, as we're having this conversation, we are a day out from a healthcare CEO
Fucking sniped.
getting sniped, and
Fucking sniped in broad daylight.
and like and I've got to say it is like, I mean, whatever, you can have a whole conversation about his vigilantism is a good idea and all that stuff, right? But it's like just on a visceral level, right? It's kind of amazing how much fuck that guy there is at the grassroots.
Jesus.
People who are like not leftists.
I showed you. Okay. So last night I did the show I did the sports show in Tijuana on location, and afterwards I went to this spot and to charge up my computer and get ready to go home.
Sure.
And I saw a video from a pretty right-leaning YouTube channel that covers crime.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see if they had, I didn't really know much about it. I haven't really been following the story. I just heard about it because we've been talking about it in our group TiR chat. And when I saw the video, which was, I don't know how to put it, is deceptively right-leaning about the incident.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the comments because I thought the comments were going to kind of echo the same sentiments, right? Oh my God, crazy vigilante violence, unacceptable in New York City. How can this happen in Midtown? No, on a pretty far right-leaning site, the comments were all, and I shared it with you guys.
Yeah.
Man, that's what he gets. Fuck this guy.
Right.
That guy killed more people with denying claims than anybody else. I was shocked.
Yeah. I mean, so it's like, look, the reservoir of anger, is not going anywhere. Right. Like, and I think that, in fact, I mean, in some ways, I mean, this is all kind of downstream of the left's defeat, right? Because, because it's like, look, if you don't have any hope for political action to actually do something about our awful barbaric healthcare system, right? Then like, it's like, yeah, I don't know, just can at least get out the popcorn, and when like things descend into street level violence, right?
It was one of those moments where you're like, people hate elites, and for some reason, the guy that's been the poster boy of elites since the 70s becomes the mouthpiece of frustrated people against elites.
Yeah.
The whole thing to me, that's why I don't listen to people that go, such and such candidate should have said this. I was like, no, it doesn't matter. Repeat what I just said and tell me why there could have been a better message. At this point, unless you're not playing in the mud with these people, it doesn't really matter what you say, especially because the Democratic Party still wants to be extremely polished and PMC in their presentation. They're the quote unquote smart people in the room.
Yeah.
And it feels like that every so often will elect one of these crazy straight shooters. I'm a straight shooter. I'm a Washington outsider. And then shit goes to hell for 8 years, and then you get the polished Obama in there, then that shit goes to shit, then you get the straight shooter again. It feels like a horrible wash, rinse, repeat cycle, because there's something to be said about our love of authenticity.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you haven't solved the underlying problem, right, then why shouldn't it end up being cyclical, right? And I don't know. I've thought about like, so the like, is Trump Hitler, just Woodrow Wilson is a I mean, in some ways it's like a very normie friendly way of making the point that it's like, and I mean, I guess if you're just looking at the headline, you might miss. It's like, look, I think Woodrow Wilson was, as Joe Biden once said of Corn Pop, a bad dude, right? He did a lot of really bad things, right? In fact, Woodrow Wilson did a lot of the specific bad things that Trump has promised to. sent troops to Mexico, started a Red Scare, right? But I think it's sort of a usefully less apocalyptic metaphor, right? And I think that you know, I think that if you're going to be serious about, building up a workers movement, like actually having a left project that could ultimately be successful, in a country like the United States, you've just got to have an incredibly long-term view, because like last I checked, we have like a 6.7% rate of private sector unionization. And, we couldn't even get like a minimum wage increase passed in California, right? As I said, all the stuff I voted for failed, right? So I think that if you're going to turn that around, right, you really need to have a long view. And if everything is a 3-alarm emergency all the time, I just don't see how you're going to get through the long haul.
Well, Ben Burgis, will you be joining me in the champagne room?
Yeah, I wouldn't miss it. I can't, I can't wait to see what the equivalent is tonight of that, the video from one of the last times I was on the champagne room, of the woman who was talking about why she found gangbangs liberating. This is the kind of top tier content that you get in TiR champagne rooms.
Of all the things that we've done, I would hope you would forget the whole liberation gangbang lady. Or not, or keep bringing it up. The most popular clip from last month, the second most popular video on this channel, was you and I discussing Rick Beato and what we disagreed with. There was no gangbangs.
Yeah, no, it was actually a good discussion.
But another popular clip was us talking about the cut couch. We did create the cut couch.
See, I saw our friend Tony say in the chat that we're in the age of hyperbole. So it's a cut couch now, not just a cut chair.
Oh no, it's a whole couch. It was an entire couch. We made a clip. Please
there could be like 10 cucks at once, in the cut couch.
This isn't the regular just one cucking. This is a group cucking. The group cucking.
No,
and that's how you get fucked.
Yeah. I actually thought the Rick video discussion was really interesting.
I didn't know that people were going to care that much, but I think there was a lot of hate watching as well.
Yeah, that's probably true. But no, wherever we end up being, wherever we end up landing tonight on the Rick video to cut couch spectrum, I'm here for it.
Cuck bleachers, someone calls it. It's kind of like cuck bleachers. I didn't think to call it cuck bleachers. Maybe that would have gotten even more views had we just said cuck bleachers and not. Yeah, I think the clip is called "Interrogating the Cut Couch."
It's like the
the cut guest house. Recliner cut couch. It wasn't a recliner. It was just a couch that made me think, why is the couch positioned not
facing the bed?
Not yet facing the bed and not the TV. Like, why?
Well, on that note,
the cuck interrogation. But yeah, there's I think I sent it to our group chat, but it should be a cute discussion. We don't have to be on too long. I know it's late. What I'll do is, for people that are watching on Ben's channel, give them an argument, GTAA. I will send him the link so you too can join us in a very uncensored conversation. And I will try not to. I haven't been watching any of those videos that I did before where we saw the gangbang liberation lady. But I'll tell the story about what happened in Canada if you guys like, so you know why Fascist Jack was such a fucking douche nozzle. He was being fashy fucking Jack at the border at like 4 a.m. for no good reason. Fuck that guy. If he's watching right now, hey, fuck right off.
Yeah. It's so funny too, right? It's like it's the perfect it's the perfect petty gatekeeper personality job that it's like, oh, you're defending the border of fucking British Columbia, right?
Yeah.
Now that's like against the waves of Americans who are
4 40-somethings in a fucking car that just, we don't want any trouble. If anything, we want to stretch our legs. Like, nobody's trying to fight you, man.
It's just the ultimate, it's just the ultimate. I get to feel important because I'm an authority figure, and it's like what you're doing, the job description, I mean, yeah, God forbid that guy was absent from his post and people could just drive from Washington State into British Columbia. Like, we just have anarchy.
The border was just that dude. There wasn't even like an arm that came down.
Which is actually part of the story, but yeah.
Yeah, he could have just like ran out there shaking his fist. It's like, "Eh." Yeah, if we had a video of Rick Video talking about gangbangs being liberating, that would be how we fucking make real.
That would be quite a shift for the tone of his show.
That's how you know that guy sold out. I have on the show today.
That's like how Hawk Tuah Girl's new bid for relevance. That she's gonna come on the show and
and actually fucking just gobble cocks. Just with fuck. Oh god, that just sounds sad. That little girl. Ugh. She actually is something I want to talk about because she is made the news with a stock scam. I'm being serious. Millions of dollars.
I actually did. That's probably why she was in my head in the first place. Is that I
hope. All right. On that, like Ben said earlier, on that note, if you're a GTAA subscriber, just hang on. I'm going to send Ben the links. He'll put it up for you guys. If you're a TiR subscriber, the link's already there. I can't wait to see you guys in a little bit. We are